Our next guest is calling on President Trump to confront China's, quote, unfair, non-market practices that are killing U.S. manufacturing jobs. Joining us now, Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna of California. He's the ranking member of the House Select Committee on Strategic Competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. So tell us what you're seeing so far out of this visit that is happening right now in Beijing. What are your concerns, and what do you hope the two leaders may come together on?
Well, I was just in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Ohio with the China Committee. Donald Trump ran saying that China had taken advantage of us, that he was going to stand up for farmers, for manufacturers, for our steel industry, our auto industry, our shipbuilding industry. And instead, what does he do? He doesn't take small and medium-sized manufacturers with him, workers with him, farmers with him. He literally is taking Wall Street executives and tech billionaires to China. He's begging them to put money into the United States, and there are already Chinese firms like Fuyao that are undercutting glass manufacturers in Pennsylvania. He is not standing up for our farmers and trying to get soybeans sold there. And he is forfeiting American industry at the behest of the very global elites that he ran against.
So, Congressman, as you say, rightly, Donald Trump has said for not just during campaigns, but for years that China is ripping us off. China is ripping us off. I'm going to change that. So I suspect you agree with him on the point, but not to his work to solve that problem. So just for our viewers, from where you sit on your committee and knowing these issues very well, in what ways is China ripping off the United States or practicing unfair economic policy?
First of all, they subsidize heavily every one of their industries. So if you're an American steel manufacturer, you don't get the United States government giving you money. China gives all of their manufacturers basically unlimited subsidies if they think the industry matters. Second, they dump into American shores. Third, some of the companies that they have in the United States have hired people who are undocumented or abusing those workers. They're non-unionized, and they're still getting subsidies. So Americans simply can't compete. And as you pointed out, Trump ran on all of this. He said that we were getting our lunch eaten by China. And now he finally has a chance to do something to rebalance. And he's taking the very Wall Street and tech billionaires who offshored our jobs, and he's begging China to put more money into the United States and violate labor. It's really a betrayal of the American worker.
Congressman, where would you put the Chinese theft of intellectual property on a list of things that we should address with China?
Very high. I mean, they basically required American companies to go there and give up their technology to Chinese companies. That was their game. We'd go there. We went for cheap labor. They'd lure us in. And then they took our technology and they started building industry. One important thing is, to the extent that China is coming into the United States, by the way, they're not giving joint venture to Ford or American companies. They're only doing it as licensing agreements. So American companies don't get the IP. They still get their intellectual property, and they're undercutting American workers. They simply have not played fair. And if you look at the hollowing out of places like Warren, Ohio, Johnstown, Downriver, Michigan, Western Pennsylvania, Meadville, Johnstown, a big part of it is the China shock. It's because both parties shafted the working class in this country. I believe that's why Donald Trump won twice. He got the problem right, but now he's basically doing the worst in giving more of a deal to China.
Congressman, a lot of these criticisms have been made really for over 20 years since China entered the World Trade Organization. So what would you actually do differently? And what policies would you adopt that would make a difference, particularly since a lot of people would say, well, China's part of the problem. The bigger problem is not so much China as the emergence of new technologies, which are replacing workers on the assembly line.
Richard, I would have a Marshall Plan not for Europe, but for the United States of America. Let me give you 4 concrete ideas. I'd have an industrial investment bank that would actually fund factories in this country, in the industries of the future, batteries, new steel, new cars, new ships, in places that were deindustrialized, combined with an investment and production tax credit. Second, I'd open up 1,000 new trade schools. Third, I'd open up new tech institutes to get folks prepared for the jobs in AI and technology of the future and make sure you're investing in places that were hollowed out. Fourth, I'd invest in our care economy, and I'd make sure all the venture capital wasn't just in my district. We've got a country, my Silicon Valley district has 1/3 of the nation's wealth, $20 trillion. You can't have a few places and a few people in America basically hoard the nation's wealth. We need to make sure that the investment is across this country. And I call it economic patriotism. If we did that, we could actually compete with China instead of watching our industry and our jobs just hollowed out.
Congressman, I want to get you on another story out of your state. Vice President J.D. Vance announced yesterday, as you know, the Trump administration will withhold $1.3 billion in Medicaid payments to California. The vice president saying the administration is targeting California specifically because the state is not taking fraud seriously. Vance also threatened to suspend federal funding to all 50 states if they do not aggressively prosecute fraud in their Medicaid programs. The announcement comes as part of Vance's role as fraud czar, as he's being called. Congressman, just your reaction first to this story. That's an awful lot of money to an awful lot of people who need it in the state of California. But also, is there a problem with fraud in your state?
It is so unfortunate that the vice president is playing politics with people's health care. I mean, hundreds of thousands of Californians are going to lose their health care. We already have had people lose their health care because of the Medicaid cuts for tax breaks for billionaires. And he's not dealing with fraud. If he wants to go after fraud, why not go after the fraud of Medicare Advantage and the upbilling? Why not go after the fraud in the Pentagon budget, which is 56% of our discretionary budget? Tim Burchett, a Republican, and I have a bill on fraud to actually audit all of the states. But you don't do that by cutting the benefits for the most vulnerable. So he's using fraud to go after the most vulnerable and take away their health care, and that's just not a moral position.
Is there a problem, though, Congressman, with fraud as you see it? I mean, Dr. Oz was at his side pointing out specific instances of areas that need review, at least red flags, as they put it.
Well, I would say two things. There's certainly fraud in the federal government. I would argue that the two biggest places are in the Pentagon budget and in Medicare Advantage. Does California need to do better with fraud, waste, and abuse, as other states do? Sure. And we need to look at where that waste is. But that waste is not in the payments going to Medicaid, where working and middle-class families rely on that for health care. So he is using fraud for an ideological agenda to take away health care. We need to be actually standing up for Medicare, Medicaid, and go after the fraud with the private insurance companies, go after the fraud with the Pentagon contractors. And like I said, I've worked on a bipartisan basis to actually audit the 50 states with Tim Burchett.
All right, Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna of California, thank you so much for coming on this morning.